Hey everyone, Steve the Amateur Historian on the right across the street from Waterfront Park. And I noticed there's these cool old columns back here, these old cast iron columns, these white ones you see. I know there's some more in Ankeny Square, and it looks like these are also from the Smith and Watson block, which used to be quite a ways south of here, so I'm surprised they've saved so much of this cast iron and put it all the way up here. But that's just, that's just there. Just thought I'd point that out to you if you're ever in the area. I'm at Davis Street and Nadeau Parkway, trying to get across the parkway if this freaking light will ever change. There we go. Anyway, let's get things rolling. I got for you fresh off the grill, another episode of Historic Murders of Portland. And I've got for you, won't be the first, won't be the last, another trunk murder to bring to you guys. This one is from 1915. November 19th, 1915 to be exact, because I memorize all of my information. Alright everyone, so from the edge of the Willamette River, this is where today's story begins. Now it's important to understand, in Portland history, this steep wall we got here, that's to keep waters back even when it's flood season and the river rises. And that is because this used to not be here. It used to be more like the other side. There was just kind of land and it just kind of went up. And there used to be buildings going almost all the way to the water line, and it would flood in Portland every single year. There would be a massive flood because there was nothing to hold the water back. So now that this is here, this water wall, and now that Waterfront Park kind of park space stretches all the way to here over by the steel bridge, there's no roads coming through here now. That's important to note because in 1915, again, I'm looking at it upside down because I'm trying to channel George Bush on 9/11, I guess. There we go. November 19th, 1915. That's just, I guess, going to be an ongoing joke in this video. So November 19th, 1915. Flanders Street, which I can actually see the traffic light through there, and this building up here kind of aligns with it, so there's Flanders. So it used to come all the way through. That's important to note because on this day in November, a guy who lived in or ran a rooming house said that he saw something suspicious floating down along the river at the foot of Flanders Street. So again, Flanders Street used to come and end probably much closer to the water, but right here in the water, a guy that ran a rooming house, so his house was probably somewhere here, he saw something floating in the water, and he attested that about an hour before then, he saw two people carrying something down to the river. He apparently couldn't make them out all that well, but he was able to find little details, like he noticed that their faces were really flush red, like whatever they had dragged down to the river, it was really heavy. But really not a detailed account, but he saw this suspicious behavior somewhere during the 5 p.m. hour. And then a little after 6, he actually went down to see what it was. And it was discovered that what had been dragged down, kind of tossed loosely in the river here, was a trunk. And when the trunk was open, there was a man's body inside. And this was a scenario where a man was discovered, and it took a little while for them to figure out who he was. And interestingly enough, because he was kind of a recent transplant to the area, I actually think he was from Boston on the East Coast. And interestingly enough, nobody in the Portland area knew who he was. The reason they were able to identify him was because he'd been down in Salem, about 45 miles south of here. And he apparently was either a devoutly religious man or he was trying to become more so. And he had attended a church service in Salem And somehow, the preacher at the church he went to saw his picture, or under some circumstances such as that, and he recognized him, and he had contacted the authorities and said, that's a guy named John Linnd. Linnd with 2 N's, L-I-N-N-D. You know, kind of a different way of spelling it, but the police were able to identify their man, which made it a lot easier to actually begin an investigation. Now you actually know who you're investigating. A little bit deeper into downtown now. This is 10th and Harvey Milk is where I'm at. And once they were able to identify this victim as a guy named John Linnd, he had been staying in a hotel that was right across from the old Clyde Hotel, which is this right here. And the marker, when I tracked the address, was more where kind of this building is now. However, you know, markers like that are always, you know, sometimes approximated. They can be off by as much as half a block. And that being said, there is another old hotel here that, while my marker put it more here, there's an old hotel building right here as well, and I'm pretty sure this may have been around. This was a 1915 crime, so I'm not sure if this hotel is that old. It might be. Whatever the case, the hotel that he had been staying at was either this one here or there was another one right here. And obviously there's a hotel across the street. This been an old hotel. This was an old hotel. There's another old hotel, the Georgia Hotel's like right on the other side of this. But whatever the case, right here is where John Linnd had been staying. And in close succession with when, or I guess a little bit after, the trunk was discovered in the Willamette River, a little ways, kind of this direction. One of the cleaning, I actually think it was the proprietor, the person who ran the hotel, which again may have been this one back here. She went into the room that John Linnd had been staying in, and it was splattered with blood everywhere, walls, the bed. It was obvious that something really bad had happened. And so you have those events happening in close succession, and we're able to connect, oh, that's where John Linnd was actually murdered. And we're more or less able to kind of trace what happened in the immediate aftermath, because this was, I believe, probably the night before, or probably more early morning hours to, you know, morning after 6 a.m. on the day of the killing, because we have the bloody crime scene here, and we had an interesting thing happen actually a fairly good distance away, maybe geez, I really don't know, 10, 12, 15 blocks this direction. I'm telling you, I start talking about murder cases and it's like the police hear murder and they're out on the prowl. But anyway, so it's only a little while after this murder takes place at approximately 11:30 up here in the Chinatown area. A guy named Ed Hopkins, at least that's how he identified himself, probably an alias. Even the police were thinking that the moment this story came to them. But it was of interest to them. Now, this is the Overland building. This is an old warehouse that was horrible disrepair a couple years ago, and they fixed it up nice. It's beautiful now. And right in the vicinity of this building, according to the old address that was given for it, there was a horse carriage business here. The address put it kind of right smack on the edge of this building, and this building's been around for a while. I actually looked it up. I found no past any description of this place ever being a horse and carriage business. So there may have been there's a big lot here. There may have been a building at this time here. That may have been where it was. It may have been a little bit that way, a little bit that way, but this is the vicinity. I'm on 4th Avenue between Everett and Davis Street. And this vicinity is where this guy identifying himself as Ed Hopkins shows up. Tells the proprietor, and he's kind of nervous and uneasy about it. He needs a horse, and he needs a rig, is what they were called, or how they described it, which I'm guessing is, it's a horse and buggy, more or less. And it's about 11:30 a.m. the day that this murder takes place, and the guy who owns the place is actually taking a break, and he's walking away from the business. He's on the street here, he's walking away, and Ed Hopkins runs up to him and pressures him, and he's aggressive, and he coerces him. Just please go back for a couple of minutes, I need a horse now. So the guy gives him one. Hopkins says that he needs it so he can go pick up a bunch of chickens. I guess he's going to be a chicken farmer. I guess it makes sense. Not very practical in today's age, but that's what the guy said. And it's interesting. So he takes his horse and carriage, or a horse and buggy. He's gone for a while, and a little after, pretty close to, when the trunk containing the body is discovered, Hopkins conveniently returns with his horse and rig to this site, turns it into the proprietor, and according to news reports, the proprietor kind of jokingly says, "So, did you get your chickens?" And Ed Hopkins just kind of stared at him dead-faced and just walked away. Just seeing nothing humorous about it. He just turned and walked off. So this Ed Hopkins guy's a little suspicious, and he's rented a horse and buggy, which you could conveniently, one of the things you can do is transport luggage, aka a trunk, in these circumstances. So law enforcement feels pretty convinced that the guy that came to this area to get a horse and rig is the killer. And he used that horse and rig over the course of that day to get rid of that trunk. And there's a guy that is seen on the day that this is all happening, and he's seen taking stuff down into the basement of the hotel, claiming that it was trash that he wanted to burn. I'm guessing maybe they had an incinerator down in the basement of the hotel. And the idea is he was maybe actually getting rid of evidence of the crime. But yeah, whoever this Ed Hopkins guy was, he had presumably gone over to Chinatown, kind of that way, picked up a horse and buggy and brought it back and probably parked it right along the street here, went inside and got what he needed to, hopped back in the buggy, and started going this way back down towards the river. And it's a really It's a really brutal crime. He has his head caved in. He had a massive fracture to his skull, and he was actually put into the trunk naked. And they said that when they discovered him in the trunk, he had been discovered like a massive crack in his skull, and actually there was brain protruding out from the wound. So this was pretty violent and pretty graphic. And it's fortunate that the first person to identify this trunk victim as John Linnd was this preacher who knew him in Salem, because it started coming out that right before he came to Portland, Linnd had been up in Salem, and he'd been moseying around with another guy who seemed to be like a business partner. And John Linnd had a lot of money on him. He was talking about how he was going to buy a huge chunk of property, and he was just going to kind of settle down and enjoy the rest of his life. So the guy had money, which there's motive. And people remembered seeing Linnd with this guy, and they remembered him as being a George Bartholomew. And while people in Salem liked John Linnd, they didn't like his buddy Bartholomew. There was something kind of troubling and off about the guy. So pretty quickly, law enforcement's attention turns to who's this George Bartholomew guy and where is he? And so it's interesting that George Bartholomew would ultimately end up coming back to Portland and turning himself in. You'd think in doing that he either just had a guilty conscience, decided to give up, or what is happening? I don't know. Anyway, so you think maybe the guy had a guilty conscience, decided to turn himself in, or he's got a wicked spin of a story that he's going to tell everybody that's going to show that he was innocent. And essentially he kind of did a little bit of that, but it was your classic, like, why would you do this? And what he comes back and says, and a lot of criminals have used this dumb story when they know they're in a little over their heads. But anyway, the hotel, which would have again been roughly right behind me, he says that he's there with John Linnd, all is well, and according to his account, which I'm looking at upside down, they were at the hotel on Stark Street, which this is Harvey Milk now, but it used to be Stark Street back there. He says another man barged in and attacked John Linnd and then apparently took off. You know, no detail apparently, just a guy showed up out of nowhere and just beat John Linnd to death in front of Bartholomew. And apparently Bartholomew was like, well, I don't really want to get mixed up in this, so I'm just gonna, you know, sit back and watch stuff happen. Guy walks out after apparently killing John Linnd. He doesn't go after him, he doesn't do anything to help his best pal. He's not gonna, you know, the guy comes in and starts attacking him, he's not gonna help his friend fend him off, he just seemed to sit there. So then, in the aftermath, he's like, well, then I decided, you know, I guess probably, oh, they're gonna think I did it, because why wouldn't anybody think that? So he just decided, well, I guess I'm just gonna get rid of it. So he puts it in the trunk. He admitted to all that stuff. He admitted to being the guy that went and got the horse and buggy. He admitted to putting the body in a trunk and then ditching it in the river. He admitted to all that, but it was all under the guise of, well, you know, it wasn't really me. Someone else did it. I don't know who he was, why he did it, but he did it, not me. But I thought, oh, I'm gonna take the fall for this, so I did all this stuff afterward that makes me look guilty. So, of course, when you go to court and that's all you have to go on, nobody's going to believe that. It's like the guy spent his time coming back to Portland and turning himself in, and it's like he apparently spent about 15 seconds trying to figure out his story because it was not a good one. And so it was pretty easy to convict this guy. I think the jury only took like 30 minutes to make their decision. It was so obvious to them that this was the guy. He'd been with John Linnd all this time. John Linnd had money, which would be motive, and his story sucked. I mean, what more can you say? He didn't have a good BS story. So in the end, we all knew he did it. I don't know why I say we, I wasn't around yet, but the world around George Bartholomew, they knew he did it. So finally, by January 1917, over a year later, Bartholomew was finally convicted of his crime of murdering John Linnd because some bitches just couldn't get along. So we know Bartholomew committed the murder. He went to get a horse and buggy from this vicinity right over here, really not too far from here, only about 4 blocks away. Took that back to the crime scene where he was able to remove the trunk that had John Lind's body in it, transported it down here in the buggy, got rid of it. Apparently not well enough because it didn't like float off. It kind of lingered long enough to where an hour later it was able to be pulled fairly easily from the water. And took the horse and buggy back, and I can only assume thought he was going to get away with it. But alas, this is fortunately a crime where it doesn't go unsolved in the end. And that's the story of the 1915 trunk murder case of John Linnd. Hope you were intrigued, fixated, hopefully at least a little bit disturbed, or else there might be something wrong with you. There's certainly something wrong with me, as I'm seemingly obsessed with these cases. It's wild to look at crime from another period of time and how everything's just addressed and dealt with and done so much differently than it is nowadays. But anyway, guys, people with no life, ruining my ending. Anyway, guys, drive safe. And in addition to that, as far as rules you should follow in life, remember to like and share this video. Subscribe if you haven't done that already. Hoping to keep my channel growing. You can hit my Patreon if you want to help with that. The link's in the description, top of it, as always. And until next time, guys, from kind of the northern fringe of Waterfront Park. I don't even know if this is quite Waterfront Park anymore. Wherever I'm at. This has been Steve the Amateur Historian with another episode of Historic Murders of Portland. Why am I even trying? These guys are just going to ruin everything. You know what? Forget it. I'm not posting this video. I'm crushed. I'm sad. I'm going to go home and cry.